We're going to move on, and we want to continue the conversation this morning on extended producer responsibility. And so we have some of the experts on that with us today from the Product Stewardship Institute. And without further ado, Scott Cassel and Rachel Perlman.
Hi, can you see our screen, or my screen?
Yes.
Great.
You have a halo. You're very angelic this morning.
Yeah, it's a sunny day behind me. Well, Scott, I'll let you take us off. Are you unmuted, Scott?
Sorry, I can't see your screen.
Oh.
So.
Can everyone see my screen?
I can see it.
Everyone else can but me, huh? So maybe I need to put up the same presentation here on my screen.
We just see Rachel's face, not her screen, though.
Oh, really?
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me try this again. You see my screen, but not my presentation?
We see you, but
We
not
see
your
you.
presentation.
Gotcha.
Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
One more.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah.
How about now?
Yes.
Is it in full view?
No, not for me.
Okay, let's try one more time. Sorry about this. All right. Is this good?
That's it.
All right, great.
Excellent. All right. So this is the this is the last session, yes, of this conference. It's really nice to have a chance to loop into Oklahoma. I prefer to be there in person, which I have done many times before. I'm Scott Cassel. I'm the CEO and founder of the Product Stewardship Institute. And as people know, I'm very fond of music from the Woody Guthrie Festival and other things. So since it's the middle of the day, but the end of the conference, all right, so that's for Woody. That's for Oklahoma. All right, next slide, please. We're going to start off here. And Rachel's going to advance the slide. So who is the Product Stewardship Institute? We're a national nonprofit. We're located in Boston, but we do work all over the United States and have been working very closely with the Oklahoma DEQ. As you see, they're one of our 47 state members here, and well as City of Norman and other local governments in Oklahoma. So we're a nonprofit working to build capacity for product stewardship and extended producer responsibility. We've been doing this for about 20 years. Not only do we have state and local governments as members, we also have over 100 partners, mostly from business, as well as environmental groups, other organizations, universities, and even international governments. Next slide, Rachel. So I'm going to go back to some of the basics. Many of you may know about product stewardship and EPR, many not, but we use this term, the big circle product stewardship, as the policies that reduce the health and environmental impact of consumer products all across their life cycle, from upstream to downstream. We work on about 25 different product categories as well as packaging. But you see it's broken up here into other government regulatory programs. These would be ones like bans or fees on plastic bags or polystyrene, any regulatory initiatives that government may make. But on the producer side, they can be either voluntary or mandatory. So voluntary initiatives, which we've worked with quite a bit in Oklahoma, are the Thermostat Recycling Corporation collects mercury-containing thermostats all across the country and they have sites in Oklahoma. The same with the call to recycle for rechargeable as well as other types of household batteries. So those are examples of voluntary programs. But on the mandatory side, we call that EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. Next slide, please. So EPR is actually a law that would extend the producer's responsibility for the financial and managerial responsibility for products and packaging beyond the manufacturing stage to the post-consumer reuse, recycling, or safe disposal. Typically, laws are focused on that producer to the left, and what EPR does is, like the name, extends it to the end-of-life management, post-consumer, whether it's reuse, recycling, or let's say pharmaceuticals, you want to safely dispose of it. Next slide, please. Well, on the packaging and other products, right now the consumer on the left in the green purchases their product from the producer. And that's the end of the producer's responsibility right there. And to manage it post-consumer, the taxpayers end up paying a municipality, which then contracts with haulers and recyclers. In many cases around the country, ratepayers might contract directly with haulers and recyclers themselves. So it's a disconnected system, fragmented. Rachel, next slide, please. So under an EPR system, it all comes together. It's a way of tying the system together. So you have the consumer purchasing from the producer or the manufacturer. We use those terms interchangeably. And they join together in usually a nonprofit called a producer responsibility organization. So it's an organization that organizes the producers so that it's more efficient, and they would provide a plan to a state agency. But they also contract out to the haulers, municipalities sometimes for the collection, and the recyclers for the processing. Next slide. So the benefits in a high level for these EPR systems over current recycling systems, well, they're funded by the producers and the consumers and not local governments and taxpayers. And this is really important. You know, you've heard of the China sword, you've heard of the green fence before that, where there's restrictions on the sale of recyclable materials. And governments have to scramble to deal with the fluctuations in the markets. Governments are not well set up to handle those inevitable market fluctuations. No one could have predicted the China sword, but it just ended up being a large market fluctuation. But this problem has existed in the United States, not only in Oklahoma, but everywhere else for at least the past 15 years, and that's why the recycling rates have been leveling off. So EPR systems can also harmonize the recycling statewide. It's one consistent basket of recyclables that are collected to reduce the contamination, and there's levers put in and incentives put in for the manufacturers and the municipalities as well to reduce contamination. There's also a uniform resident education as well. So it's not fragmented in each municipality, same list of materials collected. And what that does is it creates higher value for the recyclables when they go to be sold. So increased marketability of those materials. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, these EPR systems are more stable than current systems. We see that around the world. We've done research, other staff, Rachel, myself, and other staff, Sydney and our staff, have done research in Canada all across. We've done it for the past year and a half in response to the China sword. And we see that their programs are more stable because they're funded by the producers themselves. And the governments don't have to be relied on for responding so quickly to such a large discrepancy in costs from one year to the next. And yes, then producers absorb those costs. And in the good, the years where there's more costs, they pay them. And the years where there's more profit, they have it, they take it. Next slide. So there's 8 key elements to EPR systems. One is that there's legislation that levels the playing field. Voluntary systems are good to start. But what you see is that the good companies, the ones that want to do something, the ones that put money in, they'll be at a competitive disadvantage pretty soon, because they'll look around and their competitors aren't doing this. And eventually, if they really solve the problem, it's going to be more money than they really want to pay and can't pay, because of it would be non-competitive to their competitors. It also outlines the scope of products, like what is packaging? How do we define that? It's all defined in an EPR law. It defines which producers are responsible, and specific language for that, and how the programs are financed. It has a stewardship organization that manages these programs, as I mentioned. It has design for the environment, so that it gives incentive to the producers of the packaging in order to put those products on the market, so that they're more recyclable, more reusable, less cost to the recycling system, more value in the back end. And so it's a choice for the producer. They can have more fees on them if they put a non-recyclable or less recyclable material on the market, or lower fees, and even bonuses for recycled content and other positive factors. It gives options for municipalities in terms of how the funding and the management of these systems take place. And there's government oversight by the state regulatory agency if it is a state law. Next slide. So in the US, you'll see here that there's 119 of these EPR laws passed on 14 products in 33 states. We started in 2000 with 8 laws on one product. It's just batteries. So you see, we've come a very long way in 20 years. And you see the distribution of these laws. And Oklahoma, which Rachel will talk about, has one law, and it's on electronics. But around the world, look to the right, it's old data, granted, but it's still, the trajectory is the same. This is the best data that they have. It's EPR systems are bursting around the world. While there's no packaging EPR in the US right now, although there's a dozen states that are introducing it, there's packaging, tires, and electronics are the most prevalent around the world. Next slide.
Yes, I can jump in here.
And here's the handoff.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Perlman. I'm a senior associate for policy and programs at PSI. So bringing this kind of more locally, what does EPR look like in Oklahoma? So Oklahoma has one EPR law, and it is for electronics, as Scott mentioned. Those of you who were in Amanda's breakout session on electronics have already heard a little bit about this. So this law, called the Oklahoma Computer Equipment Recovery Act, passed in 2008. Compared to other laws around the country, it's relatively weak, so it has opportunities to improve. So I just wanted to touch on those. Right now, it is very relatively low participation from manufacturers. So there's some mail-back programs, there's some drop-off programs. Amanda had been talking about in her breakout session that collection has dropped off over the years, in the past few years, for a number of reasons. Another kind of opportunity for improvement is to have a stronger funding mechanism. So having a funding mechanism is important so that the regulatory agency isn't stuck with an unsustainable program. And ideally, we want these funding mechanisms to be specified in the law itself. It also does not have a performance goal, and having a performance goal, such as a percentage of electronics that are manufactured that must be collected and recycled, is important for making sure that we're reaching some acceptable standard and kind of pushing the envelope, or even just holding manufacturers to a standard that makes sense given what is technologically possible in that area. Convenience is also really important. Convenience is key in that it leads to higher participation by consumers. Oops, sorry about that. Also, these laws can be paired with other laws that help tie in and emphasize or push consumers and manufacturers towards recycling. So disposal bans, for instance. And lastly, the scope of products covered is not full in the sense that it doesn't include TVs, it doesn't include telephones. So there's opportunities for improvement, but it's good to know that this law exists, and now you all are all aware that it's actually an EPR law. So Oklahoma, one of the ways we're engaging with Oklahoma, with the PSI, is through a work group we have that we're running with the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality. And this work group is on stewardship or safe disposal for pharmaceuticals and medical sharps. So this is another highly active area in Oklahoma. And this work group has been working towards promoting safe and convenient disposal for unwanted medication, used sharps that come out of the home. And one of the projects we've worked on is creating a map of all of the known pharmaceutical drop-off locations. So around the state, there are pharmaceutical, for your unwanted medication, when you do a clean out of your medicine cabinet, you can drop these pharmaceuticals at a number of locations. And on the next slide, I'll show you the map we created with the help of the work group and DEQ. But still, sustainable funding is needed to ensure year-round access. So in a lot of locations where there is not a high density of drop-off locations, consumers are relying on DEA-sponsored take-back events. And one of the opportunities we see for most improvement is actually in sharps. So the map we created is for pharmaceuticals, but we didn't create one for sharps yet because there aren't a lot of locations that are convenient for consumers to drop off sharps. So we're trying to increase awareness on these issues. And if you happen to be interested in these issues, I'd encourage you to send me an email and I can add you to our distribution list. It's open to all, and we're working on education and outreach, and also understanding the infrastructure for collecting pharmaceuticals and sharps in Oklahoma. This is the map we created, and so I just wanted to show it to you because it's kind of an exciting and a resource. And after this conference, I can make sure it gets shared with you all, this link. But basically, this is a map of Oklahoma, and each of these dots represents a take-back site for pharmaceuticals. So the blue are law enforcement sites. The green dots are pharmacies. Pharmacies tend to be the most convenient location for most because they can drop it off when they pick up another prescription. We also have some collections at other health services sites, clinics, hospitals, etc. So I want to kind of shift to another focus area, which is packaging. So Scott alluded to this, and it's probably come up earlier in the conference, but packaging is a really challenging problem. We're facing a flood of packaging, especially plastic, in this country, and our systems are struggling to keep pace. Here in the US, we don't have EPR for packaging, but we do know it's a problem. And packaging is made of increasingly complex materials that are difficult or impossible to recycle. So this complicates the end-of-life management for these materials. And one thing EPR does is it puts producers in charge of the materials they put onto the market all the way through the end of life. So it can be a solution to that complexity of these materials. So one of the ways that it can help alleviate the problem is to provide incentives for producers to use better packaging and to design for more recyclable products. So designing for the environment, and this can help us achieve better environmental outcomes. And so, as I said, we don't have EPR laws for packaging in the US, although many states are interested in it. But it is spreading around the world as you can see in this map. So all of the countries in blue, including Canada and much of Europe and elsewhere in the world, have mandatory EPR in effect for some type of packaging and paper products. That's what PPP is. And some using voluntary systems or are in have some sort of framework. So we're really seeing this take off, and I think you'll be hearing more and more about it. I'd also kind of like to give you a sense of what's going on currently in the US. So with EPR for packaging. So the PSI model of EPR is kind of taking shape and getting a lot of activity. So there's activity in at least 12 states and counting. Where PSI is working to support these states in their effort, provide information and guidance, and we're also working to support and provide a model and framework for legislation for things like the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which is a federal legislation. This is sponsored by Senator Tom Udall and Representative Lowenthal. So this legislation, which is very exciting, has a lot to it. It has EPR for packaging, it has bag bans and fees, national bottle bill, which is something currently that only exists in a number of states. So it has a concept of making that bottle bill go national, and also contains other single-use plastic bans. So this is a very active area, and I'd encourage you to, PSI provides a lot of updates on this activity, so definitely kind of follow us. We have social media accounts and talk about a lot of these issues. And I also wanted to bring up how things are affected by COVID. So this has probably come up in the conference I was sitting in yesterday. I heard a little bit of the conversation, but COVID has been a challenge for recycling and take back, and some of these take backs have been interrupted. We've heard from our member states, local governments, that household hazardous waste was especially take back was disrupted. Paint, take back electronics, mattresses, batteries, and curbside recycling in some areas. So we saw that some sites closed for certain periods of time, so maybe transfer stations or county level facilities. And Scott mentioned this, but one thing that EPR kind of relates to this is that EPR has helped solid waste programs withstand turmoil. So it is something to consider that Canadian provinces with EPR have had fewer recycling disruptions with COVID. So it can add a stability. And so in some ways, with challenges like COVID and disruptions to financial stability for a lot of municipal governments, EPR can be a solution to consider because it adds a stability. And my colleagues, Sydney Harris especially, was working on tracking how single-use plastics and policies around bag bans, et cetera, had been impacted by COVID starting in March. So since March, what we've seen is that across the US, there were 79 policy rollbacks related to plastic bags and containers across 22 states and DC. So these were happening at the city and the county and the state level. So in this graph to the left, this is showing the number of policies is is the height of the bar, and cities are in blue, counties are in green, and states are yellow. And so bag bans were lifted, reusable bags were even banned from some supermarkets. You may have seen that at your local supermarkets. And all of this surrounds the fact that there was a lot of confusion about what was safe to touch at the peak of COVID, and whether reusables versus single-use materials were safer. And what we've learned from the literature and studies and reports is that there is really no benefit of single-use over reusables for things like bags out of your supermarket. So what we're hoping for is for some of these policies to be lifted so that bag bans that were in place can reemerge. But currently 45 of these 79 policies, 57% remain in effect. So, and some may extend through 2021. So we'll be interested to see how this plays out. And this is, again, just the same data, but just in a geographic form. So you can see that where these bag bans occurred. So in the states in red have policies that still are in existence, and the states in green have policies that were in place during March, say, through May, and now are lifted. And so all this kind of comes back to supporting responsible management of plastics. And one thing I'll say for Oklahoma is that one thing you guys can do is make sure that your municipality did not lift any waste reduction policies or single-use plastic bans or fees. So that's something you can kind of have an effect on locally. Scott, anything you'd like to add here? Shall we move on to your slide?
Yeah, move on. It's okay. All right, so I will take over here. Thank you, Rachel. So just to wrap up, you can see that this is a table and there's little pieces together, and that's how we think of key stakeholders, that in order to have agreements, whether it's voluntary or whether it's mandatory in an EPR system, there needs to be a connection. And either way, you need to have municipalities working with producers, haulers, recyclers, processors, retailers, environmental groups, and others. And so what our organization has done in Oklahoma, and what Rachel and I are working on is on the pharmaceuticals right now and medical sharps in terms of the safe management of those particular products. And we're doing it on a voluntary basis right now. And if the group wants to look at any of the regulatory solutions, we will lay out some of those options. But these systems need to be connected. What EPR does is it provides an accountability mechanism. It gives specific roles that are spelled out for each of these groups. As I mentioned, the producers have a very large role because they're putting these materials on the market. Each material for packaging, whether it is PET plastic or whether it's polypropylene or other materials that can't be recycled or flexible packages, whatever it is, they have a cost into the system. And right now there's not a connection between what the producers are putting onto that system and what you as municipalities or waste management companies or consumers are actually paying for it. So what we're looking for is a mechanism that connects the producer to their action, to whatever material or product that they're making. If you're making a mattress, that can be easily recycled and it has value in the back end, which, there's always a cost for managing these materials. Mattresses can go from, $8 to $15 or $20 each mattress. And it can depend also on what that mattress is made of. So we're looking at it, as a more nuanced tool, as a way to actually manage the waste, to reduce the waste, to introduce reuse, and recycling of those materials, recyclability, recycled content. It all has a place within an EPR system, and you need all these stakeholders for that discussion. And I think that's the biggest thing, is you need a table for that discussion, and we're very fortunate to be able to work with the DEQ to provide that forum, if you will, for all the voices to be heard, and for wonderful maps that I'm getting. My internet is unstable. Can you still hear me, Rachel? Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the map that Rachel did, and other work that's coming out of the committee, we're working in hand, and because we don't have all the answers. We know from other states, we know from our experience working in this for 20 years or more, what to do, but you're all the experts. You're the ones that know Oklahoma, you know your cities, you know what you want, and what will hold, and what the goals should be, and how to reach those goals. And we give options, and we discuss it together. So if you are interested particularly in the pharmaceuticals and medical sharps, please let us know. And if there's other products, that's what we'd like to know as well. So I know, Ellen, you were asking if it's time to throw out a couple of questions to the group. I think it is. We'd love to hear your comments, questions, and what is it that you'd like to see for waste management, and what do you think of these ideas of product stewardship and EPR? And there's the first one now. So should we just look at should we facilitate ourselves here in terms of the questions that are coming in?
I can help with that, Scott. I know we had a question early in the presentation from Kelly Dixon asking, can you expand on what you mean or give examples of funding mechanisms regarding Oklahoma's program?
Okay. So Rachel, do you want to talk about the electronics program and how that is funded?
Well, I'm not. Well, it doesn't specify. I'd have to look into that. I don't know the answer to that. So there's no funding mechanism specified in the bill. So I'd have to, sorry, in the act. So I'm actually not sure how it is funded.
There's some funding for it, but it's limited. And I would say that the model for Oklahoma's electronics law right now makes it more of a less effective law, if I could say so. So the manufacturers here, Patrick, thank you, is manufacturers do pay a fee to sell their devices in Oklahoma. If I recall here that for that it is computers but not TVs. Is that correct?
Yeah, TVs are not covered.
I think that's what it is. So there's there's a whole basket. So if we were to relook, for example, as a group, with an EPR lens on it, if we're going to look that way, we're going to want to say, what is the scope of products? What do we mean by electronics? Well, electronics on one hand can be computers, it could be TVs, and then there's all the peripherals. There's printers, there's keyboards, there's mice, there's speakers, there's the wires, there's everything to it. And cell phones are sometimes in these. So the wide basket, of course, the wider scope of products that would be included in it would be more effective. You'd be collecting more of the electronics and taking more of the potentially toxic materials out of the waste stream. The law in Oklahoma right now is very narrow. So that's just one example, and it has very limited convenience and performance targets and so forth. So what we've developed is, and I didn't go through this fully, but we have 19 different elements, or say 20 different elements for every single product or packaging. And that's how we kind of build these these EPR bills together is that we we would have each element, and it's a framework for discussion in each state. So for example, we're working on packaging right now in a number of states. We look at what is packaging in paper products, because that's 30 to 40% of the waste stream. How do you define that? How do you define who's responsible, the responsible party? How do you, what is that? What should the performance targets be? What do you consider success? How about convenience standards? Is it one collection, for materials in each county, or is it curbside? Is it curbside? Is it as easy to recycle as it is to dispose? So we need to look at each one of those items, those 20 items, and have those discussions. And you need to have all the stakeholders involved in that.
It looks like we've got quite a few questions and comments regarding plastic bags. So Shavara mentioned there are many national chain stores that normally offer a discount for using your reusable bags and avoiding those plastic bags. And certainly COVID is probably impacting that. But here in Oklahoma, Scott and Rachel, you might have heard the city of Norman tried to pass a ban on plastic bags, and the legislature replied by banning bans. So we were wondering if you could talk a little about how we could deal with that.
Well, yes, there's a big divide in this country, we know, in many ways. And so, in this, in the spirit of collaboration here, let's say that municipalities all across the country really don't like to be preempted. But on another hand, what we propose is harmonization. We're trying to harmonize these programs. And the reason local governments around the country, in my opinion, have banned plastic bags or put fees on those plastic bags is because not enough has been done to reduce the litter and contamination of the recycling stream. So it's a really big problem that was not addressed either federally or at any of the state levels. I mean, let's face it, it cropped up, and we have ocean plastics, and there's just a big outcry over all single-use plastics. And the bags, since they're light, they fly around, and they get into waterways, which all flood into the oceans downstream. So, it's been a big target. And so these, having an individual municipality pass a law is not the most effective way to do it. The most effective way is at the state level, but the state would have to take that on. And this is the tug of war we see, is if if the state itself does not want to take on an issue like plastic bags, either in the best solution, we've done a lot of research on this, the best solution is a ban on plastic bags and a fee on paper. There's some states and localities that are banning paper and plastic. There's some that are putting fees on paper and plastic. There's multiple different ways, but here, with multiple discussions, and looking at all the research around, from what we want to do is to make sure that people use reusable bags. I mean, that's really the goal, the behavior change. We want to have people bring their own bags and have incentive. So one way to do it is to give them 5 cents, like Whole Foods, did for a really long time around the country. And I'd get my 5 cents back. But what you find is that most people really don't want to pay that extra 5 cents. They're glad to take the 5 cents, but they don't want to pay an extra 5 cents. So that even gives them more incentive to bring their bag. So the fees have been very effective, and a ban, of course, gets rid of the plastic bags and this problem. And so that's the whole thing. The preemption issue is a problem. We don't support that ourselves around the country, but we understand that states are autonomous, and they just don't want bifurcated, fragmented systems. And if you have a good, strong law that solves the problem in an efficient way, that's all we can ask for.
Okay, we had another question from Graham, but
Could we see the, before we do that, could we see the results from the poll?
oh yeah.
All right, so it looks like the majority either think it's a crucial policy or it's one policy that can boost recycling markets and getting towards zero waste. So overall, I think that's a pretty good showing, and I hope it looks like only a few people had never heard of it. So great.
Great. Okay, so the question from Graham was, do you guys have an example from a state that has a good TV program?
A good TV program. There is good electronics programs around the country, and we can send those to you. There's unfortunately there's no real model for electronics. So let me answer the question directly. Vermont, Maine, Connecticut, Oregon, Washington have very good electronics programs, collecting all the electronics, big basket of them. They also have a little more control on them themselves from a state perspective. Illinois has just introduced a very unique concept called a clearinghouse, where there's 6 of these producer responsibility organizations that I mentioned before, that the producers themselves, the electronics manufacturers, get to choose which of these 6 units, organizations, to manage their system. And then there's an upper group called the clearinghouse that actually works for the producers, that then assigns different PROs to different regions based upon whether it's urban or rural or suburban, and various other categories that deal with cost and complexity of the issue. But there's kind of an arbiter. And we find that is very interesting. It's an experiment, but it's going very well. So I think that Illinois is one to look at as well. There's been some of the laws that have been created put in performance targets that were meant to be a floor, meaning 6 pounds per capita, and then it was supposed to go up once they reached 6, but the law wasn't written well, and that's in about 8 states. So the manufacturers stopped collecting when they got to the 6 pounds. Local governments couldn't say no to their residents since they opened the doors. They were getting 7, 8 pounds per capita, and they then had to pay for those, and that's been a big problem. So it's really how you design these systems, and electronics is one of the first that we worked on in 2000. But unfortunately, there was no model that was developed. The electronics industry walked away from the table for discussions, unfortunately, leaving us and Oklahoma with a fragmented array of systems.
Okay, it looks like we have a pharmaceutical question from Faye. In the medical pharmaceutical industry, there seems to be a demand that long-term facilities use meds that are packaged in individual dispensing forms. Is this based on laws that have been passed or regulatory requirements, or for the ease of use for the long-term dispensing? It creates much more cost, waste, and patients can't often use the meds or use quantity prescription dispensing that patients or facilities that they already have. How do we get this changed? Sorry.
My guess is,
Rachel, did you want to jump in on that one, or do you want me to take it?
I'll just start and then I'll hand it off. So my guess is that packaging, that this single-use, single serving packaging is not regulated in this case, but it clearly is a challenge. So, and that's kind of also where packaging EPR or packaging related focuses of these policies comes into play. And I'll say one thing about this is that, there's when we talked about pharmaceutical take-back programs, now pharmaceutical take-back programs will take back the pills or whatever form the medication is in with its original packaging or without its original packaging, but it's not focused on packaging. It's focused on taking back the medication and disposing of it in a safe way. So ultimately it gets incinerated in a special facility. But Scott, I'll let you jump in here.
Yeah, sure. I'll add to what Rachel had mentioned. We're dealing with residential pharmaceuticals and medical sharps for the most part. So the long-term care facilities are a problem. It's more on the commercial side of things. It's not necessarily in the big scope. It's something we could work on as a group if people would like to. And so the take-back programs that we've been working on are for households and more residential of waste stream.
Okay. Kaylee asks, long term, do you see the packaging industry pivoting toward materials that are easily broken down and compostable, like mycelium and bamboo plastic, or should there be more of an investment in materials that already have strong existing recycling markets?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the compostables, as you know, they're problematic in recycling streams. You have compostable plastics and other things. It's hard for the consumer to tell the difference. And if there's not a closed loop system for the compostable plastics or alternative materials that can be composted, then you run the risk of contaminating the normal or regular recycling stream. So these type of, in an EPR system, this would be a big discussion. And we're actually, this is this issue here that was raised by Kaylee is one that has, it was Kaylee, that it's one that we're asking nationally too, is like, how should a packaging EPR system deal with compostable plastics? Because it's better than throwing it in the landfill. This is at least what we're hearing from our local governments in Vermont. We just got off a phone last week spending half an hour on this topic. Better to throw them in the landfill here or waste energy plant for these compostables. But it's that would be the worst case. But we really want them composted. But right now there's not the system set up for it. So we might want to have standards for introducing these into a system. Let's say a certain fee is set, I don't know, let's say the fee is 0.1 cents per pound of this material that's put onto the market if there is a closed loop system, or if there is a composting system in place. But then if there's not, they can still put it on the market, but they'd have to pay more because it won't be composted, it'll be disposed. And so they'll give them an incentive to set up that composting system to reduce their cost of putting this material on the market. That's a very crude way of saying it, but it just gives you an idea about how these EPR systems have a little, they're a tool here for giving incentives in the right place.
All right. Did we get an answer to the second polling question? Or I know we have at least one more polling question, right, Rachel?
Yeah, you can throw it up. I'm not sure which order all of them were in, but let's throw it up.
Oh, the wizard can do it for us.
Yeah, so do you think we need a better way to manage plastic packaging in our country? Give people a couple seconds to answer that. And then I guess when you have enough responses, you can throw up the results. Oh, perfect. You have 100%. Yeah, I agree. So plastic is one of the most problematic areas, and more things are being made of plastic. And and complex combinations. So plastic adhered to paper, or adhered to aluminum foil, and it's also not a highly recyclable material, as you probably have learned about in other sessions, where it ends up degrading over time. We often mix multiple types of plastic. Sensors have to be updated to be able to visually identify plastics in a material recovery plant. So it's a challenging material.
Let me jump in. I see styrofoam here from Faye, and that's a very difficult material. And we're looking at this ourselves. What PSI can do with our state and local governments and other stakeholders around the country on back on this, and recognize that so much has taken place just over the past year alone, that there are producers of these materials on packaging that have stepped forward and said, we no longer, blanketly oppose EPR. I mean, there are some that still do, but some associations have really come to the table and said, we're ready to talk about having a system that will not ban our material. Number one, bring it back into the circular economy, find what we can do to fund these systems, to manage these systems, and to make the change that we all really do need to make into a different type of system and have more control at the local level. Because right now, municipalities are dealing with whatever the producers are putting on the market, and it gets more and more and more complex and more waste. So there's interest in that. And so I have some good news in the sense that we've worked with the Flexible Packaging Association for the past year. I happen to know the CEO there from our time in the paint. She was the general counsel for the American Coatings Association. Her name is Allison Keene, and she came to when she switched over to the Flexible Packaging Association as their CEO. After 3 years, which ended up being last October, she came in and said, can we start a dialogue like we did on paint? And on paint, we had a mediated dialogue with the paint industry, government, recyclers, and other stakeholders. And we ended up having a model EPR law that the paint industry themselves proposes in the states. And that's been successful in 10 states and Washington, D.C. And it was negotiated together. So we're applying the same approach on flexible packaging, and we finished the year-long dialogue last week, and we will come out with a public statement about it, but we've made some very good progress and some good agreements together. And so it shows that the producers are ready to have serious discussions. That's just one segment of the population, not a full number of brand owners. But then the Recycling Partnership came out with something last week as well, and they are many brand owners. That is a group that many of you might have heard of. They provide technical assistance, education, funding in the sense of carts to municipalities. They came out with a proposal that had many of the EPR components to it, producer funding for a portion of the system, and the stewardship plan and targets and other things. It also asks for a good chunk of public funding, so some of the governments are scratching their heads on that. But that was the first time that brand owners have come out. And then you have others like the Consumer Brands Association, Ameripen, American Chemistry Council, and others that are thinking of how to move in this direction. Also, the waste management industry is starting to say, we need to be at the table or else we'll be on the menu, as that saying goes. We need to be at the table and to figure out how these systems can work for us. The haulers And the recyclers are coming in and looking, and all the people to say, how do we solve this the problem of uncontrolled waste, and too few incentives in the right place for the producers, to put better materials onto the marketplace. So I'm seeing a huge change just in the past year alone.
Well, that's great news. And that's all the time. I don't see any other questions that have popped up, and we're getting to the end of our day today. Here's the results of that last poll. So it looks like in Oklahoma, we see lots of areas for opportunity. And I know that you guys are doing lots of work here. Would it be best if someone watching today is interested in getting involved to contact Amanda Schofield or one of you? Amanda? Yes? Okay. So contact Amanda Schofield if you are interested in getting involved with the work with PSI here in Oklahoma, and she can put you in the loop. Okay, so again, thank you to Scott and Rachel. That was amazing, and for all that wonderful information.